We aren't here simply to be visible. We are here to be victorious.
Since 2019, the National Trans Visibility March has been bringing together thousands of community members and allies in a historic march through our nation's capital, all in a united effort to make our voices heard. Now, as the march prepares for its 7th year, the fight for rights is entering a new era, pioneered by a decorated community leader.
I am so grateful to step into a position that is of deep importance to me. We can no longer be unseen, unheard, and uninvolved. The time is now to unite as a community and stand tall.
Join us June 3rd through the 8th as we celebrate our strides and create a future we can be proud of.
Hello, and happy Monday. Welcome to the National Trans Visibility March virtual activation, where we are meeting every Monday leading up to our march in Washington, D.C. This June 4th through June 8th. We are so excited to partner with our friends over at Capital Pride and World Pride, and we're having a policy and safety summit and a whole lot of stuff. I want to ask you all to go to ntvmarch.org to make sure that you register for the Policy and Safety Summit if you have not already done so. This week, we are joined by Allie and our friends over at Osborne, and we are talking about something so important, especially during this time that we live in. Welcome. How you doing today, Allie?
I'm doing great, Dr. Elijah. Thanks for having me here. How are you?
I'm doing absolutely amazing. It's a beautiful day here in the ATL, and I'm just so excited to have you with us today. Thank you for spending some time with us. You know, at a time when, you know, our lives, our rights, our meaning trans, non-binary, and intersex individuals are on the line, and we are fighting every day. You know, it's one thing to have to fight for our rights, and it's another thing to have to fight for our rights, work and provide for our family at the same time, and then add to that looking for a job. And so I'm so grateful for you all spending some time with us today. Please tell our listeners, our viewers, a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your organization.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you again for having me here. So my name is Allie Kammerman. I use she, her pronouns. My current position is I'm the program coordinator for the Osborne Association's LGBTQIA plus case management program. So we work closely with the trans, gender nonconforming, and wider LGBTQ plus community to make sure that their needs are being met, in particular with relation to employment. That's been a big focus given the current job market and also all the uncertainty, you know, with the Trump administration. We are based in New York, but there are still legal protections for people on the national level. And while I'm not a legal authority, you know, I try to inform people of their rights and, you know, how to navigate, you know, especially the workplace when it comes to, you know, these issues. So otherwise, what our program does, we hold job fairs. We try to connect, you know, job seekers who are LGBTQ plus identified with very LGBTQ plus friendly employers, job development, training, education, and just other resources in the community. I've been doing this for, in general, a little over 7 years. So, you know, in that time, you see things progress and you see things kind of take a dip. Right now, we're in that kind of dip period, but that doesn't mean that, you know, we're down for the count. We're going to keep going back up.
Sure. So thank you for that. When you say dip period, do you mean like there's a dip in service, the need for service, or an increase in the need for service, your service?
Yeah, great question. So it's quite the opposite. I mean, there's a dip in kind of how protections are for us right now as the LGBTQ plus community, you know, a dip in terms of, you know, how supported we feel by the not only the state government, but like the U.S. government as a whole, and just the climate in general has kind of fallen, with the recent change in leadership. But quite the opposite. We're seeing a proportional increase in the amount of services that are needed. So it's kind of like when things are bad, people need more services, and it's kind of challenging because when people need more services at a time when we're going through this political climate, there's less resources available. So it's really important right now to just kind of be aware of what's out there and what you can do to protect yourself and support yourself.
Yes, such a critical time. And that is, one of the reasons that we are having the Policy and Safety Summit, the National Transvisibility March Policy and Safety Summit in Washington, D.C. on June 5th, which we need you all to register for, please. If you have not registered, we'll get the link up on the screen here. It's ntvmarch.org. As soon as you get to the page, you'll see register, and then just click on that because we have limited seats, and we want to make sure that you have a seat in the place this year because we got so much important information. So before I turn this over to Allie, Allie's going to give us a short presentation on the job search and the landscape now, and then we're going to have questions at the end. So before I turn it over, I just want to let you know that if you have a question, please put it in the comment section, and we'll address the questions at the end of the presentation, or if it's something really pressing, we'll put it up on the screen, and then Allie will answer it during the presentation. So I'm going to turn this over to you, Allie. I'm looking forward to hearing all this wonderful information. Oh, also, please like and share this video, tag a friend. I know there are a lot of folks that have questions about the job search now. So the more people that we can make aware of this information, the more people we can help. So take it away, Allie.
Thanks so much, Dr. Elijah. All right, I'm going to present. So you should be able to see the slides. Thank you. So just want to talk to you guys pretty generally about job searching if you are a person of trans experience or non-binary, gender non-conforming experience. Before I go into the know your rights part, I just want to clarify obviously this is a very difficult time right now in terms of understanding what's happening at the national level with our legal rights and protections. There have been challenges to some of the decisions, like the Supreme Court decisions that I'm going to talk to you guys about. I'm not a legal authority, but I did provide links to places where you could send your questions if you, especially because it's so different state to state. I really recommend looking for know your rights trainings that are specific to your location, to your city, to your state, because it's such an uncertain time right now. That being said, I'm just going to go over what the general guidelines are right now, and feel free to ask any clarifying questions. So when you're searching for a job, there's this one really major Supreme Court case that decided that the federal law prohibits specifically anti-trans discrimination in employment. This has been subsequently challenged, but the Title IV protections still remain. So discrimination based on sex is still illegal. Just how that's going to be playing out, as the Trump administration continues to make challenges to these rulings is unclear. But currently, the guideline is that it's illegal to fire, refuse to hire, harass, or in any other way discriminate against you because of your gender identity, your transition, your sex assigned at birth, or your status as a transgender person. Depending on your state and locality, there are also local laws that explicitly prohibit this. For example, New York, where we're based, New York City and New York State, we have much more robust protections that are more explicit based on gender identity and expression. So make sure that you know the situation where you live. When you are hired for a job, you have the right to not be fired or refused a job or promotion because of your being transgender, regardless of state and local laws. So you have the right to be treated with respect and not be harassed. This can include jokes or derogatory comments about transgender people, repeated and intentional use of the wrong name or pronouns, dead naming or misgendering you, any invasive, disrespectful personal questions that may constitute harassment. And in general, anyone, regardless of if they're trans or cis or non-binary, You never have to be subject to invasive medical questions. So that means that they can't ask you questions about, your transition or anything like that. You also have the right to safe and adequate access to restrooms and other facilities that are consistent with your gender identity. This is something that, again, has been under attack by the current administration. But currently, generally speaking, employers cannot demand medical or legal documentation of your gender as a condition for restroom access or limit you to use a specific restroom separate from other employees. They also cannot require you to use any facilities that are unsanitary, potentially unsafe, located really far away from where you work. If you do experience discrimination, there's a couple different pathways. So you might want to try to resolve it within your company, either as a first step, or you can use your company's internal complaint process. That's a document that's important to have. Your equal opportunity discrimination protection, like whatever that pathway is for your company, that's important to have a copy of that document. They should provide it to you upon onboarding, but you can request it at any time. You can also, throughout this process, share copies of the federal government guidance on trans workplace issues and any relevant Equal Opportunity Act decisions. Though this may not, again, this is kind of under attack right now, depending on where you live, but it's still good to have and present it to HR. You can also find out about your company's individual EEO procedures and whether their policy expressly covers gender identity. Even if it doesn't, you still can file an internal complaint. You can also try to have an attorney or legal organization approach your employers on your behalf to try to fix the problem if you feel like you need help advocating for yourself. Depending, again, on where you live, there are many different organizations that are human rights focused that may be able to provide you pro bono legal assistance. Keep in mind that you are not required to do this before filing a larger complaint with the federal, state, or local government. It's recommended to try depending on the situation, but you do not have to. You're not required. So if you do choose to escalate it to, filing a federal complaint, what you would want to do is file a charge of sex discrimination with the Equal Opportunity Commission. And this is for a few different purposes. The first one is just to make ongoing discrimination stop. If you have a charge of sex discrimination, it's going to encourage, whoever is doing this behavior to you to stop. And even if the discrimination is not ongoing, it may help stop the same thing from happening to someone else at your company. And it can also potentially result in you receiving some type of financial compensation. It can also lead employers to make changes in their policies to discipline staff that might be being discriminatory or institute company-wide training to prevent this from happening in the future. If you want to bring it to court, you do have to file a charge of discrimination with the EEOC or with your state civil rights agency. Keep in mind, there are time limits on this. So generally, you have to file within 180 days of a discriminatory action, but there are some exceptions. Sometimes it's shorter. So if you're a federal government employee, make sure you're doing it within 45 days. It's best to file in person, but you can also file by mail. Keep in mind, you cannot file online or by phone, so they do have an information hotline and an online assessment tool to kind of help guide you through this process. And the law protects you against any threats of retaliation by your employer for filing a charge. So they're not allowed to, in a retaliatory way, demote you, fire you, give you any type of consequence for filing a charge. The EEOC will likely ask you and your employer to take part in mediation. And if this does not resolve the issue, the EEOC will investigate the charge. So then the agency will either find a violation and try to reach a settlement, or will issue you what's called a right to sue letter that permits you to file a lawsuit in federal court. So that allows you to take the next step. Transequality.org, amazing organization, has an information page with pro bono legal aid for these cases. I linked it at the end. And again, this is a really unclear, unsure, confusing time for these types of laws. So definitely recommend reaching out to whatever, legal aid resources are available to you. So there's a few different approaches that you can take to job searching while being a person of trans experience. You might be wondering, when is the best time to disclose my gender identity? So it's really completely up to you. You can choose at any time to tell them. You can choose right when you're applying for a job. You can choose after you're already hired. You're protected either way. So you can choose to tell hiring managers your correct name and pronouns. This can be helpful, especially if your ID, like your license or permit or state ID or social, any of your I-9 documents are not updated with your correct name and gender marker. And keep in mind, regardless of the federal, executive order and stuff like that, that's preventing gender marker changes on, federal documents, state and local documents, depending where you live, they can still be changed. In New York, we're still changing them. So local organizations can help you through that process, many times at no cost. You can also choose to wear a pin with your correct pronouns and or a name tag. Or if you would like, you can choose not to disclose your gender identity until after hiring. This can be strategic as well. So it's really about whatever makes you most comfortable. Some people say, I want to be open about my gender identity from the start because I want to weed out employers that might be discriminatory to me. I want to make sure I'm going into a job that wants me there. Other people might say, I don't feel comfortable talking about this until I know that I have the job, especially, during these times, to make sure I'm not discriminated against in the hiring process. So it's a very individual decision. You can try to seek out affirming employers. So some ideas would be applying to nonprofits, especially those that serve TGNC populations, so transgender and gender nonconforming populations. You can look for local businesses that have pride flags displayed. If they're hiring and they have a pride flag outside, that can be a really good sign. You can also use keyword searches on job search engines. So some jobs will put in, like a statement of equal opportunity in the job listing, saying that they encourage people of diverse gender experience to apply. So you might keyword search LGBT, you might keyword search, diversity, stuff like that. And then you can also look for hiring events. Like I mentioned, my organization, we host hiring events that are focused on the LGBTQ or the transgender, non-binary, non-conforming community. And there might be other events that are similarly focused in your area. There are special programs, depending again where you live. There are, local special programs or centers sometimes that focus on LGBTQ plus and transgender, non-binary and non-conforming job seekers. They may be for the LGBTQ plus general population or specifically for transgender, non-binary and gender non-conforming job seekers. You might also consider programs for job seekers with disabilities. Again, this is kind of legally contested, but the current guidance, from what I understand, is gender dysphoria, and this has been in practice. I have been able to get clients into disability-focused programs using this, but gender dysphoria can be covered as a disability under the ADA. So if they have, programs that are focused on job seekers with disabilities, you might also qualify for that based on your diagnosis of gender dysphoria. All right, I see a question. What about people who may be going through their transition and documents may not match? That's a great question. So that's kind of part of why it's so individually dependent on your situation. If you're going through your transition and your documents have not yet been changed, it's a good idea if you want to be really clear when you're applying to a job, hey, these are my pronouns, this is my preferred name, or this is my chosen name. And, some people might choose to do that to kind of weed out employers that are not going to respect that. But then some people might choose to, if they're actively going through their transition and their documents don't match, they may choose to, apply with their dead name and their, gender that does not match their identity. And then when they feel more comfortable and they feel settled in their job, if they're hired, then they'll come out at that point. And later, I'm going to talk to you guys about what that process might look like, coming out when you have already introduced yourself at a current job as a different identity and name. Also, keep in mind that, and again, I guess this depends locally, but generally speaking, you can apply to change your documents without, there's no definition of when you're fully transitioned, right? Some people may never get certain medical procedures. Some people may only socially transition. Generally speaking, you can still get your documents changed, at least on the local level, to match your gender identity and chosen name. So keep that in mind. You don't have to necessarily wait. And especially right now, some agencies are encouraging people to get this documentation sooner than later. So again, you have the choice to disclose if and when you would like to disclose. You have the right to choose to be out and not to be outed, right? So if you go through the hiring process and you have to inform, let's say your documents don't match, right? Like in that question, let's say you introduce yourself as your chosen name and pronouns, and then in the hiring process, you have to provide your documentation for I-9 verification, for enrolling in insurance, for whatever. And whichever HR person sees that your document and your presentation do not match, they can't tell anyone about that, right? That's protected information. It's basically protected personal medical information. So it's your choice when and who, and in what setting to share that information about yourself. Once you are hired, your employer can't tell you that you can't disclose your status. They also can't fire you in a retaliatory way for coming out. If your employer has rules about who you can talk to, talking to clients, talking to coworkers, etc., those rules can't be specific just to trans people. They have to be general, right? They cannot be used to single out trans people for talking about their identity. Your employer cannot arbitrarily disclose your transgender status without your consent. So again, if someone in HR, your manager, or whoever has this information about your gender identity, they can't just, spread that information to whoever they choose. It's very personal information and it's protected. So again, some people might choose to apply to jobs with their chosen/true name to make sure potential employers are inclusive. And so if your name and pronouns are different from what's listed on your ID, you might find it helpful to note that in your application. So apply using your true name and pronouns, and then you might note, legal name is something different. These days, depending where you live, a lot of employers will ask for preferred name or chosen name and legal name as separate, lines. So keep an eye out for that. Again, they might require this, legal information for your I-9 verification, but they can't tell anyone else about it. If you are actively going through your transition and you might need medical time off, for procedures or even mental health, stuff like that, you might, when you're onboarding or, before you accept the offer, even depending on what's right for you, you might disclose this, right? Like, hey, I'm going to need some time off. I always recommend wait until you're given an offer, right? Because if you tell them that you might need time off, that might affect their decision whether or not to hire you, even though it shouldn't. It's a little bit harder to enforce, right? So we want to make sure that, you're asking for this only after you've been given an offer, right? That way, if they take away the offer, it's clear why. So when you're doing the onboarding, if you're going to need time off for surgery, doctor's appointments, etc., you want to make sure that you understand the time off policy and that you're requesting that in advance. You might want to get a form to see if there's any relevant information related to, how your company handles this. You're protected by disability discrimination laws, especially for medical procedures. There's state and local guidance on, paid time off, family leave, stuff like that. And this is true regardless of you're an intern or part-time employee, et cetera. You have certain rights that are meant to be protected. So when you're onboarded, part of your paperwork will be the company's non-discrimination policies and procedures for if you have experienced discrimination. So make sure you read them carefully, retain them in case you need them in the future. It's good to know what protections your company has in place because they might even be better than what you have at the local government level. And it's important to know what procedure you would follow if you did experience discrimination. You might also ask if there's any LGBTQIA plus or transgender, non-binary, non-conforming employee interest group. If one does not already exist, you might want to start one. And then being out at work. So there's a couple different scenarios where, you might be someone who is visibly transgender or non-binary or gender non-conforming. Even if you started your job as your true identity, you might be someone who started your job, closeted, not sharing, not outing yourself, and then decide to come out. Depending on the situation, there's a few things we can do. So I always recommend making an action plan. So the first step is just finding someone that you trust at work. This could be a close work partner, a friend, someone you've spoken to in HR that you think is trustworthy. And then next, you might want to talk to management or HR. Check if they have, sometimes organizations might even have guides for this, right? So check if they have one. And then again, refer back to the non-discrimination policy. As a first step, you might want to update personal information, right, on the HR side, such as name, pronouns, employee photograph, what pops up for you in the internal systems and email and stuff like that. You might want to decide on what gendered facilities like bathrooms you want to use. Think about if you want to formally announce your transition, think about your email, right? So your email might have your dead name in it. Your photo might not be, reflective of your current presentation. Make sure that those are ready in advance so that they can, be changed to be in accordance with your proper gender identity and expression. Making sure you're aware of your organization's health insurance policy. A lot of the time they have numbers that you can call to understand how your insurance covers gender affirming care. Just making sure you understand that. And then, if you want time off to adjust to your current gender or your new true gender expression, you might want to ask even to temporarily work from home if it would make you more comfortable, easing into that transition. There's, a variety of this. This is not an exhaustive list. There's a variety of accommodations that you may be entitled to and that you can ask for to make sure that you are as comfortable as possible. Talking to coworkers, again, it's kind of individual. It's based on what your work environment is like, what you prefer. You can choose to come out to your coworkers on an individual basis, or if you want to come out to a small team that you work on first, you might want to do it in person or through an email. Timing might also be a factor depending on what project you're working on, how long you've been there. It's all about what makes you more comfortable. If you are able to, and if you would like to, having upper management present when you announce, who you are, or even just copied on an email, that might be a good signal to your organization that you are accepted and that you're being welcomed and that they have to, comply with that. After you do come out, your coworkers might have questions. You do not have to answer questions yourself, right? This is not your job. It's not your job to educate people. It's your job to just be yourself, right? So you can ask an HR representative to answer questions on your behalf. You can ask HR, or you can yourself or your management can send out, some informational resources that people can use to, kind of learn on their own and educate themselves. But you do not have to be the spokesperson for trans, non-binary, and gender nonconforming people. You just have to be you. So troubleshooting. Unfortunately, some of your coworkers might even have a negative reaction to your coming out. So it's important to work with your supervisors, HR, to outline what is and is not acceptable behavior, and how to handle any negative reactions. So this can come from ignorance and this can come from a malicious place, but misgendering does happen. So your colleagues might accidentally use the wrong name and pronouns, but it can be intentional. And regardless if it happens repeatedly, this can cause an escalated situation. It's also not appropriate for anyone, your supervisor or your coworker, to ask you what your dead name is, what your name was assigned at birth. It's inappropriate to ask any employee for any reason about medical details, right? So of course they can't ask you questions about your transition. It's also not appropriate for them to give you transgender related advocacy work that you would not normally assign to someone who is not transgender, right? You have to make sure you're working within your job description. They can't just offload work onto you because you're trans. If you are dealing with situations or you anticipate dealing with any of these situations, you might want to ask your supervisors and or HR to help you put together a plan, either disciplinary, like this is the consequence if someone keeps misgendering me, and or educational. Hey, we're going to do a company-wide training on how to use correct pronouns, right? And this can be helpful to kind of plan in advance, just in case something like that happens. Once you do come out, there is never any need to use anything besides your chosen name and pronouns with your colleagues, even if people don't get it, even if they're uncomfortable. It's their job to deal with that and your job to just be yourself. It's also just important to remember that if you are not out in your general life, like if there's friends, family members, people you know that you don't want to have this information, keep in mind that coworkers might use your chosen name and pronouns in public spaces where people who you know outside of work might see it. So just keep that in mind. And there are steps you can take to kind of mitigate that. You might want to talk about that with your team if you're comfortable, or make sure that you're telling people, hey, don't post about me on social media, etc. Generally speaking, you have a right to control if, when, and how you come out. And you have the right to fair, safe, and affirming treatment at work, period. So just some ideas for standing up for yourself. Again, you don't have to. You can just, go right to HR if you don't want to deal with this yourself. But if you want to, stand up for yourself and respond, if someone misgenders you or acts in any way that is unfair to you, here's some ideas. So you could say, I notice you are using the wrong pronouns. Now I use correct pronouns. So you could say, I notice you're using he, him for me. Now I use she, her. When you refer to me in the third person, I expect you to refer to me using she, her. Or you could say, it's inappropriate of you to misgender me. If you continue addressing me by the wrong gender, I will let our supervisor know. Or you could say, I heard you use my old name to refer to me. I now go by my new name. I expect you to use the correct name without me having to correct you. Just keep in mind, it's not required. It's not your responsibility to correct other people if you don't want to. And then lastly, just talk a little bit about self-care. So try to keep in mind who your support network is, right? Try to identify people who you can trust and who you can lean on, because this can be kind of a difficult process, sometimes. So if you need encouragement, lean on people in your support network. During difficult times, ensure you have access to mental health care. So a lot of companies actually have, free or discounted access to mental health helplines and stuff like that. Counseling, like my job, for example, we have 6 free counseling sessions. So, try to figure out if your company has anything like that. And otherwise, just try to get access to mental health care if you can. I included some resources at the end, but it's good to learn strategies that might help you, like radical self-acceptance, dialectical behavioral therapy, and any self-care techniques that help you. Wherever you are in your transition, try to approach navigating your transition at work with self-compassion. This is not an easy process, especially in these times. There's no playbook to tell you what's right and wrong. It's all about, just taking it step by step and doing what's comfortable for you. And just remember that your transition and your identity should be celebrated, especially if you're going through your transition actively. This is a time of celebration and joy, and don't let anyone take that joy away. All right, so I have time for Q&A if anyone has questions.
Wow. That was great information. Thank you so much for all of this, Allie. And I love that you ended with the self-care piece, because that's the first question that I want to ask is, it's really, really obviously tough for so many of us right now, right? How do we stay motivated? What recommendations do you have for trans, non-binary, intersex folks, gender non-conforming folks to, stay motivated in this current environment in the job search process?
Yeah, great question. So, full disclosure, I'm not a person of trans experience, right? I just, am blessed to work with many people who, are going through this in their life. And I think one thing that I've seen work well for people, well, 2 things really. One is find community. right? Like find your people. You know, I like me personally, I'm married to a woman, I identify as lesbian. And, you know, when I went through my own coming out process, having people around me who understood that and who related to that and who also were, you know, queer and in their own lives was immensely helpful, because sometimes you can feel really isolated. Like I'm alone in this, you know, everyone's against me, but it's not true. There's so many people, not only who are allies to you, but who are going through the same thing and might not be vocal about it. Right.
Yeah.
You know, especially if we think back to how many years, many of us, how many years did we not, you know, we're not, you know, out about who we are. Right. There's people all around us who are going through that too. So you never know. So just finding your community, finding your people, and remembering that, you know, we're here, we're not alone. The other thing I think that helps myself and helps a lot of people I work with is getting kind of angry. Sometimes that can really help. Like it's atrocious, you know, the way that, you know, trans rights are being attacked and the way that people are being treated. And I think that there's a lot of righteous anger out there, not just, you know, among transgender and non-binary and gender non-conforming people, but among all of us, right? Especially, you know, there's other people in the LGBTQ plus wider family who are, you know, outraged, and, you know, people who are allies who are absolutely outraged, people who have friends and family who identify this way and who are seeing their rights stripped away for no reason.
Right.
You know, let's get angry. Let's channel that righteous anger into action.
Absolutely. And, you know, thank you for that. How you mentioned allies. How can our allies help in this whole job search process, whether it's with, you know, resumes or connections, or like what if I'm an ally and I'm watching this, what suggestions do you have for me as an ally to the transgender expansive community?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, really, really important question. It's really time to step up. You know, even if you feel like you've already stepped up more, step up higher. You know, some steps that we can take are looking at our own places of employment, right? Like do you know the policies at your own place of employment to make sure that transgender and gender nonconforming and non-binary people are being not only accepted, but embraced. And we're doing outreach to reach them and make sure that they know that this is a safe place. Or maybe where we work is not a safe place. And we have to be honest about that. And we have to kind of figure out, how can I push for change within my own organization? So get really familiar with your hiring policies, with your anti-discrimination policies. Push for really simple things like adding a line on the intake form for someone who's looking to apply to a job, preferred name and pronouns, right? You know, make sure that your company or your organization is doing trainings. Find trainings that you want to push your company or your organization to have, right? Like I personally, if you're in New York, I provide free training for employers and organizations that are looking to be more LGBTQ plus culturally competent, right? Wow. So those trainings exist. A lot of the time they're free. And a lot of the time companies, you know, they have money for trainings and they can use it on that. Otherwise, you know, just making sure that you are informed yourself, you know, you are informed on how to correctly gender people, how to correctly use, you know, pronouns that we might not be as comfortable with, you know, like newer pronouns and stuff like that you might not be used to using. You know, making sure that you are keeping informed of, you know, the legal situation and the, you know, every change that's being made at the federal level, and just coming out and supporting your trans brothers and sisters and siblings.
Absolutely. This is great information. Again, if you have a question, please put it in the chat, and then Danny will get the question up on the screen. I want to continue on and talk about organizations, and really if I'm a potential employee, what should I look for in an organization as a flag, not a flag, but a sign, a positive sign that this is a trans-friendly organization and inclusive or accepting organizations? What suggestions do you have for people like that are like fresh at the beginning, got my resume done, now where do I start, and how do I know that this is a safe place for me to even apply to?
Yeah, definitely. That's an important question. So green flags, I would say, are if you see any communications from them, if they have pronouns in their signature, that's a really good green flag. If they have a statement, and many job postings do, of, that they want diversity and equity and inclusion. So if they include like a DEI statement in the job listing itself, that's always a green flag. I always recommend also looking at reviews for the company. Like, you can go on Glassdoor, you can go on Google sometimes, and people will talk about, you can even keyword search, like discrimination. You could keyword search trans, gay, etc., and see if anyone says that they've experienced discrimination there. But in terms of green flags, pronouns, making a statement of inclusivity, and also like looking at where they're recruiting. So if they're going and putting flyers up at places where trans and gender nonconforming and non-binary people would see them, that's a green flag as well.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. We have a question. Thank you, Taylor. Hey, Taylor, thank you for joining us. Do trans people have any rights now if fired for being trans under this current administration?
Yeah. So short answer, yes. Long answer, I am not a legal authority in any way. I'm just repeating to you what I've been trained in. There's a lot of questions as to what those rights are. You absolutely have rights, but there's questions as to how those rights are protected and how those rights are decided, especially at the federal level. So I always encourage people to first look at your local, policies about discrimination, because again, in New York, for example, we have very robust protections for transgender and non-binary and gender nonconforming individuals, where we wouldn't even have to go up to the federal level, right? So being aware of what your city and state laws are is really important right now. In terms of at the federal level, there are still protections in place. It's just very unclear as to how they're being enforced, and then they're also being challenged. So if you do encounter any type of discriminatory firing or any type of discrimination at your job, it's really important to document everything, and then start at the local level. Find, if there are organizations, and there very likely are, that will, help you pro bono with this type of discrimination. They will guide you, because it's impossible to say what the rights exactly are at the federal level, but people who are authorities, they can help you at the local level and then work your way up if and when you need to.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that response. And thank you for that question, Taylor. And, our friends over at ACLU, we talked with them a couple of weeks ago. I'm sure ACLU would be happy to guide you. They have a lot of information up on their pages. Also, our friends over at Lambda Legal, want to give them a shout out as well. They've been, both organizations, the Transgender Law Center, all have been working so hard on these types of issues, which is, again, another reason why we're bringing you all and our partner organizations together in June 5th for the National Trans Visibility March Policy and Safety Summit. I have to give my shout out one more time. If you have not registered, or my plea, if you have not registered, please go to ntvmarch.org and register specifically for the NTVM Policy and Safety Summit. That is a part of the, shout out to World Pride, that's a part of the World Pride Human Rights Conference. And as a part of your registration, you will have access to the entire 3 days of that conference. So it's a win-win for all of us. And there's some amazing folks that are going to be there. And again, we're bringing our partners together, and we have some major announcements that we'll be making this week as well. As we wrap up, the host forgot to silence his phone. As we wrap up, do you have any tips that we haven't covered yet, Allie, for someone who may be going through the job process and just, what I love right now today is that I'll say our younger generation, because I consider myself to be in the latter generation. I hesitate to say elder at this point because I just don't want to accept that yet. But there's some folks who are like still in high school, fresh out of high school, and or in college, looking for some summer internships. And many people are I think that's Gen Z. They're a lot freer than I was able to be a few years ago, right? And so what suggestions or recommendations do you have for them as they look to connect for like internships and summer jobs?
Yeah, great question. And, as an elder, zillennial, as I sometimes call myself.
I love that.
Right on the cusp, but I can definitely understand how scary it is kind of coming up in this current climate, feeling like maybe there are opportunities that you won't be afforded because of who you are, and that's really discouraging and difficult. But I just want you to know that there are so many opportunities out there for you, and people and organizations that are going to be so thrilled to have you. So I think it's a couple different things you can do. It's one of the most important things you can do is, kind of find your community again, like look for it. There's one of the it's kind of a double-sided issue where there's a lot more funding for people who are trans identified and younger than there are for people who are older. So that's an unfortunate reality, but take advantage of it while you're young, right? A lot of the time there are like youth centers for people who identify as LGBTQ. Find them, tell them, even if they don't have existing like employment internship programs, tell them that's something you're interested in. Because someone like me who works at a nonprofit, if someone comes to me and they say, hey, I need the service, I'm going to do my best to kind of find a way to provide that service, right? So get connected with resources, with community in your area. And, just keep an eye out for opportunities, right? Just because an organization is advertising for an internship and they're not saying, we want trans people, that doesn't mean they don't want them, right? So don't ever assume it's a no. You know what I mean? Like, there's something that I had a mentor who, said something that really stuck with me, which is don't ever be the one to close the gate. You know what I mean? Like, don't ever close the gate on yourself. Don't ever close the gate on others just because you think it's going to be closed.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Thank you. Datoria asks, with the current political climate, do you feel it's harder for TGNC individuals to find jobs? What can be done to assist?
Yeah, so it definitely is harder. In part because people are, more cautious. People are more afraid to kind of disclose who they are. Even if your place of employment might be really great for people who are, transgender, non-binary, or gender non-conforming. So in terms of what you can do to assist is just be really explicit about, wanting to include these people in your hiring. So for example, putting your pronouns in your email signature. That's a huge one, right? Wearing even like a name tag that has your pronouns on it. Those are both really good green flags that don't take a lot of effort. Changing your onboarding documents to allow for, chosen name and pronouns, right? Making sure that your place of employment is doing training to make sure that the people that you work with and yourself are informed on how to, be an ally, right? How to be inclusive. And then also just doing outreach, right? Because people aren't going to know that you're friendly to them unless you're doing outreach, right? So look at where, where the queer community is, right? Where the transgender and gender nonconforming and non-binary community is, and, advertise there, recruit there. You could even think about, having a hiring fair that's like, you can't tell someone that they can't come to a hiring fair, but saying we're especially inviting our trans siblings to this job fair.
Yes. Yep, that's great information and great question, Datoria. Thank you for that question. Thank you for that response, Allie. I want to ask a question that is on my mind, and that is about veterans. Where do our trans and non-binary and intersex, non-gender conforming veterans fit in? I am biased, obviously, as a 25-year veteran. There's some veterans who may be discharged soon or may choose to leave the military because of the ongoing attempt at the trans ban, because we know the executive order was held up in court recently. And so how can organizations connect with, one, trans veterans, and then two, what can a trans veteran who is coming off of active duty do as they transition into the workforce?
Yeah, and this question is close to my heart because my current supervisor is actually very openly a non-binary veteran, and they're like an amazing person. So I also want to quickly correct myself. I think that I use an outdated acronym in the presentation. I haven't updated these slides in a little bit. I think the current acronym that is being used is TGNCNB, so transgender, nonconforming, and non-binary. So just, putting that out there.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. But to answer your question, I think, when I think about employment for veterans, one thing that I think about is like, well, first of all, VA, of course, doing outreach at VA. But then also at, the name's like eluding me right now, but they have like special job centers for veterans who have disabilities. I don't know if you can remember what I'm talking about.
There's so many
Voc
resources.
Rehab. Sorry.
Voc Rehab.
Voc Rehab. Yeah, it just came to me. So
Yes.
like vocational rehab,
Yeah.
they have a lot of funding. Actually, vocational rehab has a lot of funding compared to other different kind of like services for people with disabilities. So connecting with like the local VA with Voc Rehab, and then for our allies, like like people who work in nonprofits, people who work in government agencies, connecting with, like, I've done this with our local or our local like veteran services office, connect with them and be like, hey, I'm happy to provide a training for your VA workers or your Voc Rehab workers, and connect with veterans who are going there and tell them about the job that you're offering.
Awesome. Thank you. And also want to give a shout out to TAVA, and that's an organization with many resources for trans veterans, and also Sparta. If there's if you have any questions, you can go to either of those websites, TAVA and Sparta, and get much more information as well on if you're transitioning out of the military and you're a trans or non-binary intersex veteran. So I wanted to make sure that we didn't leave without talking about our veterans. So if there's any other questions, please put them in the chat. Otherwise, we are going to close out. Thank you so much. This has been great information. Can you just let individuals and corporations, because I think I heard you say that you do training, and sometimes it's free and sometimes it's not. We want to get you paid. So is there, where can organizations find information, and where can individuals sign up for your resources?
Yeah, absolutely. So the trainings that I provide are always free. They're, but I can only do New York. So if you, are in another state, unfortunately, you might have to go with a different training. But if you're in New York, I'm more than happy, in New York State, not just the city, I'm more than happy to provide a comprehensive training for you guys. I can do it in person. I can do it virtual. Best way to reach me is my email, which I can put in the chat. Should I just put it in the comments?
Sure. That'd be perfect.
Cool. So I'll put it in the comments. And then also I wanted to quickly say there's a couple more resources I included in the slideshow. If you want me to put that back up on the screen.
Yes, please do.
Okay. All right. Let me just put the email in the chat. And I have a flyer for the program. I have a flyer for the training if you want to share it out to your mailing list too.
We will absolutely do that. Yes, we will absolutely do that. Thank you all so much for joining us. We'll be back again next week, Monday at the same time. And we are so grateful for your time. Thank you so much, Ali, for joining us. And thank you to those of you who asked these amazing questions. If anything else comes up, you have the email. We'll shoot your flyer out. If you have not registered for the Policy and Safety Summit at the National Trans Visibility March, please go to ntvmarch.org. Also, I want to encourage you, if you'd like to make a donation, there is a donation link on the NTV March webpage. We are actively preparing for the March, for the Policy and Safety Summit. We are also preparing for our Empowerment Day that takes place on Friday, June 6th, as well as our Labor of Love Awards. We've got some exciting, amazing news that we'll be sharing in the coming days. And also, we'll be walking in the Capitol Pride Parade. Again, shout out to Capitol Pride and World Pride. And then we will march together in solidarity with World Pride on Sunday, the 8th. And here are the resources. There's a Trans Lifeline. Thank you so much for putting this information up. The Trans Help Desk at the Trans Law Center. This is great information, and we'll make sure that we get all of this up on our webpage as well. Again, Ali, thank you so much for joining us. Shout out to Danny for helping us behind the scenes. You have made this look feel and seem so seamless. Thank you to everybody who shared. Shout out to the National Trans Visibility March founder, Marissa Miller, for sharing and posting and trusting us with your vision. And we will see you all again next week at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. Have an amazing week.
You ready to march?
We are so excited to be here and to be in year 5. And I want to tell you that I thank you for being here. I love you guys. We will march. When I say trans, you say power. Trans, 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 trans.
I am a revolutionary. I am a revolutionary.